The storm arrived without warning. The rain hammered against the windows of Crestwood High School, casting long shadows on the empty hallways. Inside room 211, a group of 6 students gathered around a table, the hum of the fluorescent lights above the only sound breaking the silence. "I swear it wasn't like this when we started," Emily whispered, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her notebook. It was barely even cloudy an hour ago. Her best friend Jake leaned back in his chair, raising an eyebrow. "It's a summer storm, happens fast." "Yeah, but this is intense," Emily replied, squinting at the gray skies outside. The air inside the classroom felt heavy, and an unease crawled beneath her skin. "I'm going to check the time," said Thomas, a lanky guy with wild hair. He stood up from the table, walking over to the wall clock. The second hand was frozen, stuck at 9:27. He frowned, tapping the glass. "That's weird," he muttered. "It's probably just broken," Jake said dismissively. "But the rain's no joke. We should head to the front office and see if anyone's still around." "Right, but if the school's locked up, we'll just have to wait until the storm passes," Emily said, not convinced. Something felt off. It wasn't just the storm. It was the weird stillness in the air, the way the rain seemed to muffle every sound. A loud, sudden blaring echoed through the hallways, making everyone jump. It was the fire alarm. "What the hell?" Jake exclaimed, already standing up. "That's the fire alarm, but I didn't see anyone else." "Let's just go check it out," said Sarah, the quiet girl sitting across from Emily. She was nervously tucking her hair behind her ear, looking unsure. Maybe it's a drill. But as they gathered their things and started heading for the door, the alarm suddenly stopped. Silence returned. It was as if nothing had happened at all. No lights flashing, no movement in the hallways. Just stillness. Emily's unease deepened. "What the hell is going on?" she muttered. "Maybe it was just a glitch," said Jake, trying to reassure her. "Maybe the storm's messing with the system." But as they walked into the hallway, the sense of something being wrong only grew stronger. The hallway was empty. No teachers, no students, not a single sound. It was almost as if the school was abandoned. "Okay, that's creepy," Emily said under her breath. "We need to find the office," Jake replied, his tone now sharper. "There's got to be someone else here." They walked down the hallway, passing the rows of lockers. Sarah was trailing behind them, her eyes darting nervously from side to side. The others didn't notice, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was too quiet. She glanced at the clock above the water fountain as they passed. It was stuck at 9:27, just like the one in the classroom. "Are we seriously still at 9:27? She asked, a chill running down her spine. Thomas laughed nervously. "You're freaking yourself out, it's just a coincidence." But Emily wasn't so sure. The air felt thicker, like they were moving through molasses, and everything seemed to be holding its breath. As they reached the front office, they found the doors locked, just as they had expected. No one was inside. Emily felt a growing pit in her stomach as she turned to the others. "I don't get it," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "The alarm went off and now no one's here. Where is everyone?" Jake checked his phone. "No signal," he muttered. "It's probably a power outage or something." "Maybe we should just go back to the classroom and wait until the storm passes," Sarah suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. Emily noticed her hands shaking. "Let's check the back door," Thomas said, already turning away from the office. "If we're lucky, we can get out and head home." The group followed him, but as they made their way toward the back of the school, something felt off. The hallways seemed longer than usual, the walls looming like silent sentinels. Emily's heartbeat quickened, and she found herself glancing over her shoulder every few seconds. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. They reached the back door, but when Jake tried to open it, it didn't budge. "What the hell?" he muttered, tugging at the handle. It was locked. "Try the side door," Thomas suggested, his voice growing tense. They made their way toward the side entrance, but when they tried that door, it was locked too. "Okay, this is getting ridiculous," Jake said, clearly frustrated. "Where is everyone?" Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she realized something. She turned to the others, her voice barely a whisper. "I think we're stuck here." Just then, the loud sound of the fire alarm rang again. This time it was accompanied by a voice over the PA system. "Attention all students and staff. The school is closed for the evening. Please remain inside and wait for further instructions." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Something was very wrong. Emily felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise as the voice over the PA system cut off abruptly. The hallway fell silent once again, the eerie stillness pressing in around them like a suffocating fog. "This is insane," Jake muttered, his voice tight with frustration. He turned toward the others. "Why the hell is the school locked up? What's going on?" They all stood frozen for a moment, the gravity of their situation sinking in. The storm outside raged on, its fury now seeming less like a natural occurrence and more like an ominous backdrop to whatever was happening inside the school. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said softly, but Emily could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Something's not right. Why would they close the school? And why would the alarm go off like that? "We can't get out the doors," Thomas replied, his voice tinged with panic now. "And none of the phones work. What if we're stuck in here?" Emily looked at him, her heart pounding. "But why is the clock stopped? In the office, in the hallway, everywhere. It's stuck at 9:27. "Just a coincidence," Jake said, though his voice faltered slightly. "It's probably just a glitch. The storm's messing with the wiring or something." Emily wasn't so sure. The fact that the clocks were all stuck at the same time, combined with the odd silence that had fallen over the school, felt like more than just a coincidence. It was too deliberate. "I don't like this," Emily whispered. "We need to figure out how to get out of here," Jake said, more forceful now, turning on his heel and heading back down the hallway. "Come on, let's try the emergency exits." The group followed, but with each step, Emily felt more and more like they were walking through a dream. The halls stretched out longer than they should, and with each corner they turned, everything looked the same. It was as though they were trapped in an endless loop of sterile, empty corridors. They finally reached the emergency exit, but as expected, it was locked. Jake yanked at the door handle, frustration mounting. "Nothing," he grunted. "We need to get to the security room. There must be a way to unlock the doors from there." As they turned to leave, Emily froze. There, down the hall, she saw someone, standing near the water fountain. A figure dressed in a school uniform, their back turned to her. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Thomas turned, following her gaze. "What the hell? There's no one here." Emily's eyes widened. "But there's someone standing there." The figure slowly turned, revealing a face that looked familiar, but wrong. It was the face of someone she'd never seen before, yet somehow it seemed like she should know them. The person's eyes were dark and hollow, like they hadn't seen light in years. Before Emily could say anything, the figure disappeared around the corner, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "Did anyone else see that?" Emily demanded, heart racing. "Yeah, I saw it," Jake replied, his voice low. "But we need to stay focused. We'll check the security room, maybe we can find out what's going on." They pressed forward, but Emily's mind was still spinning. What had she just seen? Had it been a ghost, or was she imagining things? They reached the security room a few minutes later, and Jake tried the door handle. It was locked, just like the others, but there was a small window on the door, and through it, they could see the faint glow of monitors. "Shit," Jake cursed. "We need to find a way in." "Maybe there's a key," Emily suggested, her voice tight. "We should check the teacher's lounge. There's probably a master key in there." They headed toward the teacher's lounge, but as they walked, Emily's sense of unease only deepened. Every step felt like it was taking them further away from reality, further away from any possibility of escape. "Guys, I think we need to be careful," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "Something feels wrong. Really wrong." "I know," Emily replied, her heart pounding in her chest. "I feel it too. but we can't just stand here and do nothing. When they reached the teacher's lounge, Emily tried the door, but it didn't open. She pressed her ear against it, listening for any sound on the other side. Silence. "Maybe it's locked too," Jake said, frustration clear in his voice. He pulled at the door handle. "Come on, open up." Then suddenly the door creaked open by itself. Everyone froze. Did anyone see that?" Sarah whispered, eyes wide. "I didn't touch it," Emily said, her voice shaking. This isn't happening. This can't be happening." The door swung wide open, revealing an empty, dimly lit lounge. The room was unusually cold, and the fluorescent lights overhead flickered sporadically, casting long, unnatural shadows across the space. "Let's just find the key and get out of here," Jake said, his voice tight. He stepped inside, but his confidence wavered the moment he saw the clock on the wall. It was stuck at 9:27. Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. Her heart began to race, the same time. Over and over again. "Why is it always 9:27, she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It's just a glitch, Emily," Jake repeated, his tone less convincing now. He turned away from the clock and started searching the room. But Emily couldn't look away from the clock. It felt like the hands were mocking her, like they were frozen in time, trapping them all in some horrible loop. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw movement, a shadow slipping just beyond the doorframe out of the corner of the room. "Did you see that?" Emily asked urgently. Before anyone could respond, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening crash. The door slammed shut with such force that it rattled the walls of the teacher's lounge, and for a moment, everything stood still. The echo of the impact rang through the room, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Emily's breath caught in her chest. She stepped back instinctively, pressing her back against the cold metal of the door. The others were already moving, their eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. Did anyone else hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, her heart thudding in her ears. "Yeah, I heard it. Something's not right." Jake moved toward the door, his hands already on the handle, trying to twist it open. But it was locked. Again. "What the hell?" he muttered, twisting the handle harder. "This doesn't make sense. It wasn't locked before." Thomas was pacing, his footsteps quick and erratic, as if he were trying to outrun the growing unease in the room. "This is crazy. We're trapped here. It's like the whole school is alive or something." The word sent a chill through Emily. Alive? She glanced around the teacher's lounge, its familiar surroundings suddenly feeling alien and oppressive. The flickering fluorescent lights above cast unnatural shadows, elongating the furniture and making the walls seem like they were shifting. "It's not just the doors," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's everything. The clock's stuck at 9:27, the alarms keep going up, and then that figure I saw in the hallway. Did anyone else see it?" "I saw it," Sarah replied, her voice barely a breath. "It looked wrong. Like not even human." Emily didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure if she was imagining things or if there was something in the air, something they couldn't see but could feel. Her skin prickled as she thought about the figure's hollow eyes, the unnatural stillness of its presence. It was like something from another world had slipped through unnoticed. "Okay, we need to stay calm," Jake said, his voice sharp but not entirely convincing. He paced toward the lounge's small window, peering outside, though all he could see was a wall of rain. "We just need to figure out what's going on. Maybe we can find another way out. The storm will pass eventually, right?" But Emily wasn't so sure. The storm felt different, almost like it was feeding into the tension that was building inside the school. The air was thick, pressing against her lungs. It didn't feel like just a storm. It felt like something was pushing against the walls, against reality itself. As she moved away from the door, her eyes fell on the supply closet across the room. She hadn't noticed it before. Something about it stood out to her now, as if it were calling her. "I'll check the closet," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Thomas shot her a look, his eyes wide. Are you serious? It's probably locked too, like everything else in this goddamn place. I don't know, Emily replied, moving toward the closet with slow, deliberate steps. It just feels like there's something in there. I don't know why. The others hesitated but followed her, their footsteps muted on the worn carpet. As Emily reached the closet, her hand hovered over the knob. A strange, cold feeling passed through her fingers as she grasped it. With a creak, the door opened. Inside, the room was dark, the shelves lined with dusty textbooks and cleaning supplies. It was ordinary, yet as Emily stepped inside, something felt off. She could hear it, just faintly at first. Whispers, distant and muffled like the voices of people speaking just beyond the edge of her hearing. "What's that?" Thomas asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Emily strained her ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. The whispers seemed to come from the back of the closet, from behind a large stack of old books. With a hesitant breath, she moved forward and started pulling the books aside. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, but still too muffled to understand. Then suddenly she froze. Her fingers brushed against something cold and hard, hidden behind the pile of books. It was a door. "What the hell?" Emily whispered. She couldn't believe it. It looked like a small wooden door no larger than a closet's entrance, but it was completely out of place. There was no way it had been there before. "Emily," Sarah called softly, her voice trembling. "What are you doing? We need to get out of here." But Emily couldn't pull herself away. The door seemed to call to her, like a part of her mind was telling her she needed to open it. She grabbed the handle and turned it. The door creaked open. On the other side was only darkness, the kind of thick, oppressive darkness that seemed to suck the light from the room. It felt wrong, like whatever was beyond the door didn't belong in the world they knew. "Are you crazy?" Jake shouted, his voice sharp. "Close that door, we don't know what's in there." But Emily couldn't move. Something inside the dark void beyond the door was pulling at her, urging her to step inside. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, her foot crossing the threshold. Immediately, a rush of cold air hit her face and she stumbled as the ground beneath her feet shifted. She tried to step back, but the door slammed shut behind her, locking her in. "Emily!" Sarah screamed. "Get out of there!" Panic surged through Emily as she fumbled for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. The whispers had grown louder now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to claw at her ears. They were coming from everywhere, filling the space around her. "Help!" Emily cried, her voice lost in the oppressive darkness. Her heartbeat was thudding in her chest, the sound of it deafening. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. It was the same figure she had seen earlier, but now it was different. Its features were even more distorted, its body contorted in unnatural ways, as if it were being pulled by some unseen force. It didn't move toward her. It simply stood there, watching her with its hollow eyes. Emily screamed, but the sound was muffled, as though the darkness itself was swallowing her voice. The figure in the darkness loomed, unmoving, its hollow eyes fixed on Emily. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to get away, but her legs felt like lead, paralyzed with fear. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as though the voices were beckoning her deeper into the void. "Emily, no!" Sarah shouted from the other side of the door, her voice strained. "Get out of there!" The sound of her friends' voices barely registered. Emily's focus was locked on the figure, its presence seeming to fill the room, suffocating her. The air was thick with a cold that felt unnatural, like the very temperature of the space was being warped. Every breath she took was like inhaling ice. "Stay away from me!" Emily screamed, her voice raw with terror. The figure didn't respond, but Emily could feel it. It was as if the thing knew her fear, knew that it could paralyze her with just its gaze. She backed away slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. But as she took a step backward, the floor beneath her seemed to shift again, as though the world itself was responding to the darkness. Behind her, she heard the sounds of frantic banging. Her friends, still trying to get the door open. "Emily!" Jake's voice echoed through the crack, tinged with panic. "We need to get out of there. The door's locked. Hold on, we'll get you out." But Emily wasn't sure how much longer she could stand it. The darkness, the whispers, the figure. It was all closing in on her. With shaking hands, Emily reached out, her fingers grazing the cold wood of the door. The whispers seemed to intensify the closer she got, their words growing sharper, more distinct. "Leave. Leave. Leave now. Stop it," she yelled, clutching the handle. She twisted it desperately, but the door remained sealed. Panic surged through her as she realized that there was no way out. She was trapped in this nightmare. Suddenly, there was a loud crack and Emily's body jerked as if she had been yanked by an invisible force. She spun around, her heart racing. The figure had moved. It was now standing mere inches from her. "No," she whispered, taking a step back, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The figure's hollow eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time she saw something in them. A twisted reflection of herself, distorted and wrong. "Leave me alone," Emily cried, her voice trembling. She turned to run, but as soon as she moved, the floor beneath her feet seemed to collapse. Her knees buckled and she fell hard, her palms scraping against the cold ground. The darkness closed in around her, pressing against her chest. But then, something happened. A flash of light. It wasn't much, a brief flicker, but it was enough to break through the crushing weight of the darkness. Emily looked up in surprise. The figure had stopped, its movements frozen for the moment. In that instant, she saw her chance. With a desperate, wild cry, Emily pushed herself up and scrambled toward the door. Her hands gripped the handle again, her fingers slick with sweat. But this time, something had changed. The door moved. It opened. With a cry of relief, Emily shoved the door wide, stumbling back into the teacher's lounge, her heart still racing. "Emily!" Sarah rushed toward her, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. "What the hell happened? Are you okay?" Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. The figure was still standing in the closet, its presence lingering in the back of her mind, even though she had escaped it. But the darkness was no longer in the closet. It was in the room with them now. Jake and Thomas rushed to Emily's side, helping her to her feet. But when Emily turned to face them, the room seemed different. The walls were no longer familiar. There was a heaviness in the air, a thick, suffocating pressure. She could hear the whispers again, now louder, clearer, as though the voices were coming from within the walls themselves. "We need to leave," Emily said, her voice shaking. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she knew one thing. Staying here was not an option. "Let's try the windows," Jake suggested. "Maybe we can climb out." Emily's mind raced, her body still trembling from the encounter in the dark closet. She glanced around, her eyes landing on the nearest window. The rain outside had turned into a torrential downpour, the dark sky lit by flashes of lightning that illuminated the school's desolate surroundings. It felt like the whole world was collapsing in on them. "Okay," she agreed, nodding quickly. "Let's go." They rushed to the windows, but when Jake tried to open one, it wouldn't budge. "Shit," he muttered, struggling with the window. "It's stuck. This is insane. Everything's locked down." Emily's mind raced. There had to be another way out. The doors weren't working, the windows weren't budging. She could feel the weight of the storm pressing in on them, not just from the outside, but from inside the school itself. Then she heard it, a soft sound, like a faint tapping, coming from the hall. It was subtle, but it was there. "Do you hear that?" Emily asked, her voice tight. "I don't hear anything," Thomas said, looking at her quizzically. "No," Emily insisted, turning toward the hallway. The sound was growing louder now, a slow, rhythmic tapping like something or someone was knocking at the walls. Without thinking, she moved toward the door. "Emily, wait!" Sarah grabbed her arm. "We don't know what's out there." "I have to," Emily said, her voice steady. "There's something in this school. Something that's not letting us go. We need to find it, understand it, and get out of here. With a final glance at the others, Emily pushed open the door. Outside the teacher's lounge, the hallway was even darker than before. The lights flickered above, casting long, eerie shadows. But it wasn't the darkness that chilled Emily to the bone. It was the sound. The knocking had stopped. In its place was something far worse. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. And they were getting closer. Emily's heart hammered in her chest as the footsteps grew louder, closer. She glanced back over her shoulder at her friends, their faces pale with fear. Sarah's grip on her arm tightened, but Emily gently pulled away. They had no choice. They had to know what was happening, and staying locked in the teacher's lounge wasn't going to provide any answers. The hallway stretched out before them, dark and silent except for the rhythmic footsteps that echoed through the walls. Emily's breath quickened, the air growing colder the further she walked. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, a tingling sensation spreading down her spine. Whatever it was, whatever was out there, it was coming for them. "Emily, please," Sarah whispered, voice shaky. "We can't just wander off like this. We need a plan." "I know," Emily replied, her voice tight. "But I have a feeling we're running out of time. Whatever's happening here, we need to figure it out before it's too late." They stepped cautiously into the hallway. The floor beneath their feet creaked with every step, as if the building itself were groaning under some unseen weight. The lights above flickered erratically, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The sound of footsteps continued, now almost deafening. Emily took a deep breath, focusing on the hallway ahead. There was something about this place, something ancient, like it had been here long before they ever stepped foot inside. She could feel its presence, like the walls themselves were watching them. "There," Emily said suddenly, pointing to a door at the far end of the hallway. It was different from the others, older, more worn, and the faintest glow seemed to emanate from beneath it. "We need to get to that room." The group exchanged uneasy glances, but they didn't have much of a choice. The knocking had started again, but now it was louder, more insistent, as if urging them forward. They made their way down the hallway, the footsteps following them, always a few paces behind. As they approached the door, the air grew even colder and Emily could see her breath misting in the air. With trembling hands, she reached for the doorknob. To her surprise, it turned easily, and the door creaked open. The room beyond was small, dimly lit by a single desk lamp that barely illuminated the space. The walls were lined with bookshelves, most of them covered in dust. But it wasn't the books that caught Emily's attention. It was the object sitting in the center of the room. A small wooden chest, old and weathered, rested on a rickety table. The chest looked ancient, as though it had been untouched for decades, perhaps even longer. The air around it seemed to pulse, thick with an energy Emily couldn't quite describe. "What is that?" Thomas asked, his voice low. "I don't know," Emily whispered, stepping toward the table. She reached out, her hand hovering above the chest for a moment, as if some unseen force was trying to stop her, but she pushed forward, her fingers brushing against the wood. The moment she touched it, the room seemed to shift. The temperature dropped drastically, and the lights above flickered violently before going completely dark. The chest opened with a soft creak. Inside was a worn journal. Emily picked it up carefully, feeling its weight in her hands. The cover was leather, aged and cracked with no markings, no title. It looked like something that belonged to another time, another world. She opened it cautiously, flipping through the brittle pages. The handwriting was cramped and uneven, as if written in a hurry, or perhaps by someone whose hands trembled with fear. Emily's eyes scanned the words quickly, piecing together the fragmented entries. Most of it was incomprehensible, written in a language that didn't seem to match anything she had seen before. But then, a familiar name caught her eye. "Wait," she whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. "This name, it's my name." "What?" Sarah asked, stepping closer. "What are you talking about?" Emily turned the page slowly, her fingers trembling. The entry was dated 1927, almost a century ago, but the name at the top was unmistakable: Emily Harper. "I don't understand," Emily murmured. "This doesn't make sense." The journal described strange occurrences within the school: disappearances, unexplained events, and a growing sense of dread that had consumed the students and faculty alike. The last entry was the most chilling of all. It spoke of a powerful force that had begun to consume the building, a darkness that had taken hold and trapped the souls of everyone inside. It was then that Emily understood. The clock at 9:27 wasn't just a coincidence, it was a symbol. The moment in time when everything had gone wrong. The moment when the school had been trapped. I think we've uncovered something." Emily's voice was shaky, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the journal. The last page was a single line. "The door to the other side is in the basement. Do not open it." "I don't like this," Jake muttered, stepping back from the journal. "The basement? Are you serious? We don't even know what's happening here. There's no way we should go down there." But Emily's mind was already made up. There was no time to waste. If they wanted to escape this place, if they wanted to survive, they had to find this door and close it once and for all. "We don't have a choice," she said, her voice firm. "We have to go to the basement. It's the only way we're going to get out of here." "But what if it's too late?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with fear. "What if we're already too late?" Emily swallowed hard, the weight of the journal heavy in her hands. She could feel it, the pull of whatever dark force was at work here. The whispers, the footsteps, the feeling of being trapped in time. The darkness wasn't just in the walls, it was inside them too. "We can't give up now," Emily said, her voice steady. "We have to try." And with that, the group turned and walked toward the exit, the journal in Emily's hands, the weight of their next move heavy on their shoulders. They had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: they couldn't stay here much longer. The air in the school had thickened, pressing down on them as they made their way toward the basement. Every step felt heavier, as though the weight of the building itself was dragging them down. The footsteps had stopped, but the whispers hadn't. They echoed in the back of Emily's mind, distorting everything around her. No matter where they went, the sound seemed to follow, winding its way through the walls and floor, getting louder and more insistent. By the time they reached the basement stairs, the walls were closing in on them. The flickering overhead lights cast eerie, elongated shadows that danced across the walls. Emily's pulse quickened. She wasn't sure if it was from fear or the strange, overwhelming pull to go deeper into the darkness. But she knew one thing: there was no turning back now. "This is insane," Thomas muttered, his voice trembling. "We have no idea what we're even looking for down here. I don't understand any of this." Emily could barely look at him. The tension in the air had become unbearable, and every instinct in her body screamed that they were on the edge of something far worse than they could imagine. Still, she held on to the journal tightly, the weight of it grounding her as she stepped down into the basement. The stairs creaked with each movement, but the sounds of their steps felt distant, almost muffled by the thick fog of fear surrounding them. As they reached the bottom, the air turned colder, the temperature dropping significantly. The basement stretched out before them, filled with rows of old storage shelves and abandoned equipment. But it was the far corner that caught Emily's attention. There, hidden behind a broken filing cabinet, was a door. It was no ordinary door. The wood was dark, almost black, and the edges were chipped and weathered. It looked ancient, out of place even in a building as old as the school. There was something about it that felt wrong, as if it had been there far longer than the rest of the basement. "I think this is it," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. The journal's final entry had described a door like this. Something that didn't belong, something that held the key to everything. "What do you mean, this is it?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "That's just a door. How do we even know this is what we're looking for?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, swallowing hard. "But I feel it. This door is connected to everything, this whole school. We have to open it." Her hand hovered over the doorknob, but before she could touch it, a strange pressure filled the air, a low hum vibrating through the walls. The whispers were louder now, as if the very foundation of the school was starting to tremble under the weight of whatever lay beyond the door. "Emily, don't," Sarah started, but Emily was already reaching for the knob. The moment her fingers made contact with the cold metal, a shock of energy surged through her. It was like being struck by lightning, the power of it coursing through her veins. The door swung open with a creak, revealing a room beyond that looked nothing like the basement. The air inside was thick with an unnatural fog, and the space was dimly lit by a flickering light that seemed to pulse from within the room itself. The walls were lined with strange symbols, glowing faintly as if they were alive. The floor was uneven, cracked, and dark. And in the center of the room was a single pedestal, its surface covered in dust, and upon it, a dark crystal. The moment Emily stepped inside, the world around her began to shift. It wasn't just the room. The entire basement seemed to warp, stretching and bending as if reality itself was being unraveled. The floor beneath her feet rippled like water, and the walls twisted, distorting into shapes that didn't belong.
"Emily!"
Sarah screamed, her voice panicked.
"Get out of there now!"
But it was too late. The door slammed shut behind them, trapping them in the room with the pulsating light. Emily could feel her heart racing, the thudding of it reverberating through her body. The crystal at the center of the room gleamed, as though it were calling to her, and the whispers grew louder, louder still. "Touch it," a voice hissed in her mind, low and guttural. "Touch it, and the truth will be yours." The voice was not human. It felt ancient, otherworldly. Emily's hand moved almost of its own accord toward the crystal. She didn't want to do it, didn't want to give in to the pull. But her fingers moved, slow and deliberate, and the moment she made contact, the world around her exploded into chaos. The light grew blinding, searing her vision, and the room seemed to fracture, the walls collapsing into shadow. The air grew thick and heavy as if they were being pulled into some kind of void. Emily could feel herself slipping, as if her very body was being torn apart. Then, everything went black. Emily opened her eyes, but what she saw was not the basement. It wasn't the school either. She was standing in a void, a vast empty expanse that stretched on forever. The only thing that existed in this space was a dark, swirling storm of shadows, a storm that seemed to pulse with life. And standing before her, towering above her like a god, was the figure she had seen before. It was not the same as before. This was something older, something more powerful. Its eyes, those hollow, lifeless eyes, were now glowing, radiating with an otherworldly light. "Do you understand now?" the figure asked, its voice a low, rumbling growl. "You have opened the door. You have released the truth, and now you will pay the price." Emily wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She couldn't move, couldn't run. The shadows pressed in around her, consuming the space, and the figure's presence grew stronger, heavier. Suddenly, the figure stretched out its hand, and Emily's body jerked violently. The pain was overwhelming, like her very soul was being torn apart. "No!" she tried to scream, but the words wouldn't form. The figure smiled, a twisted, monstrous grin. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the world shattered once again. Emily's body jerked awake with a violent gasp, her heart racing in her chest. Her eyes flew open, but the world around her was not the void she had just seen. It wasn't the storm of shadows or the towering figure. No, she was back in the basement, her hands gripping the dusty floor as if she had just fallen. The air felt thick, heavier than before. Her mind reeled, and for a moment she couldn't quite grasp what had happened. Was it a dream? A vision? Or had the door done something more? She blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself, but the world around her was still in flux. The walls seemed to shimmer as though reality itself was hanging by a thread. The crystal on the pedestal pulsed with an eerie light, casting long shadows on the cracked walls. The whispers were still there, swirling, vibrating through the air, only now they were louder, more insistent. "Emily, Emily." The voices, soft and beckoning, seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was all too much. The weight of it, the pressure. Emily forced herself to her feet, shaking, her legs unsteady as if the ground beneath her was alive and shifting. She looked to her friends who were frozen in place, eyes wide, faces pale with fear, Sarah, Thomas, and Jake, all staring at her, waiting for her to make sense of it. "What happened?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. "Where are we?" Emily's throat felt dry, her voice cracked when she spoke. "I don't know, but it's like we're in some kind of alternate reality. The door, something's wrong with it." Jake's eyes flicked to the pedestal where the crystal still pulsed with that disturbing light. "What do we do now? We're stuck in here. This place isn't normal. We have to figure out what that thing is," Emily said, her voice steadying despite the chaos surrounding them. "There's no other way out. We have to stop whatever this is from taking over." The whispers in the air seemed to grow more frantic at her words, and Emily could feel the weight of them pressing down on her chest. The feeling of something watching them, something lurking just beyond their sight, was overwhelming. The temperature in the room had dropped even further, and she could see her breath misting in front of her. A sudden sound broke the tension, loud, sharp, like the crack of a whip. Emily whipped around, eyes darting to the door they had entered through. It was gone. There was no trace of it. The walls were smooth and unyielding, as though the door had never existed. "No," Emily breathed, her voice trembling. "No, no, no. We're trapped." Her heart skipped a beat. The room wasn't just distorted, it was alive, changing around them. They had no way of knowing what was real anymore, and it seemed like whatever had been unleashed was bending the fabric of their reality, twisting it into something unrecognizable. Suddenly, a voice, cold and deep, boomed from somewhere behind them. "You have come too far to turn back now." The group froze. The voice wasn't coming from anyone they could see. It was everywhere, reverberating in the air itself. The ground beneath them shook slightly, like the building was responding to the voice. The whispers grew quieter now, almost like a chorus, as if they were waiting for something. Emily's pulse quickened as the voice continued. "The time has come," it rumbled, "to choose." Emily's stomach twisted. She couldn't understand what was happening. A choice? What choice? The only thing she knew for certain was that she wanted to escape. She wanted to find her way out. But the voice was offering something more, something that didn't seem to make sense. "Choose what?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking. "What do you want from us?" The voice laughed, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very air around them. "To save yourselves, to leave this place, and or to become part of it," it said, its tone heavy with dark amusement. "If you choose to leave, you will not remember any of this. You will return to your lives as if nothing ever happened." Emily's mind raced. The idea of going back to normal sounded like a dream. But was it the right choice? Was it truly what they wanted? "But if you choose to stay," the voice continued, "you will become part of this place. You will belong to it. You will walk these halls forever, trapped within the loop of time." The ground trembled beneath her feet, and Emily could hear the faintest hum coming from the crystal, as though it were alive and aware of their presence. Something in the air seemed to press down on her chest, and the choice the voice spoke of loomed large, suffocating the very space around her. "Choose wisely," the voice warned, the echoes of it stretching into infinity. Emily looked at her friends. They were all visibly shaken, their faces pale with fear. No one spoke for a moment. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but closed it again. They were all stuck in this nightmare together. "What do we do, Emily?" Sarah finally asked, her voice small. "What if we make the wrong choice?" Emily glanced around, her thoughts racing. They couldn't stay in this place. Whatever it was, whatever was behind this door, this alternate reality, this twisted version of their world, it had already begun to seep into their minds, corrupting them. If they stayed, they would lose themselves to it, just like the others who had vanished before them. But going back to their lives, erasing all memory of what had happened, could they truly live with that, knowing they left something so terrifying behind? The truth weighed heavily on her. The whispers were getting louder again, urging her to make a decision. Her fingers tightened around the journal, the weight of it grounding her as she faced the impossible choice. I don't know, Emily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But I know we can't stay here. This place, it's not real anymore. It's twisted. It's consuming everything. I don't want to stay here, Jake said, his voice full of dread. But what if it means we can never remember? What if we forget what happened here, but it's still out there? What if we can't stop it? Sarah looked at Emily, her face stricken with fear. I don't want to forget this, but I want to leave. The voice seemed to be watching them, waiting, but Emily couldn't stand the pressure any longer. She felt the weight of the decision, the responsibility of it, but deep down she knew what she had to do. She turned to the pedestal, eyes fixed on the crystal. It pulsed again, drawing her in. We have to leave, Emily said, her voice steady despite the terror swirling around her. We're not staying here. The crystal flared brightly in response, its glow so intense it seemed to fill the entire room. Suddenly, everything went dark. Emily's eyes fluttered open to a world that felt achingly familiar yet disturbingly distant. The soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the faint sound of shuffling footsteps in the hallway. Everything was normal. Too normal. She blinked rapidly, confusion clouding her mind as she pushed herself to a sitting position. The floor beneath her was cool. The dusty concrete of the basement was gone. The room around her was bright, sterile, and completely unlike the terrifying chamber they had just been in. The weight that had pressed on her chest moments before was gone. She took a shaky breath, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the air was warm. Emily, are you okay? Sarah's voice cut through the fog in her mind, gentle yet full of concern. Emily's head snapped toward Sarah, who was kneeling beside her. She wasn't in the basement anymore. She was in a hallway, the school's hallway. She looked around, her mind reeling. There was no crystal, no strange symbols, no darkness, no door. Where are we? Emily's voice was hoarse. The memories of the last few hours, or was it days, feeling like a fevered dream. We're back at school, Sarah said, looking just as bewildered. In the hallway. Everything's normal. Emily's gaze flicked to the surroundings. They were standing in the corridor, the very same hallway they'd walked down earlier that day. The walls were pristine, the lockers lined up neatly, and the fluorescent lights overhead hummed quietly in the background. She could see students walking by, chatting and laughing as if nothing was wrong. But it didn't feel right. Something was missing. Something that had been there before. The fear, the tension, the strange feeling that the world wasn't quite what it seemed. All of it was gone, replaced by this overwhelming sense of normalcy. Normal? Emily whispered, her voice trembling. This doesn't feel real. You're not still dizzy, are you? Thomas asked, his voice tinged with anxiety. He appeared next to them, eyes wide and scanning the hallway. Everything's fine, right? No more of whatever that was. Emily shook her head, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something had changed. They had just been trapped in some twisted version of the school, in that horrible place beyond the door. But now, this? Everything's fine, Emily, Sarah insisted, her voice softer now, though there was a slight tremor to it. We're back. It's over. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. Was it really over? Had they truly left that place behind? Her hand instinctively reached for the journal, but when her fingers brushed the pocket of her jacket, it was empty. She could have sworn she had been holding it just moments before, when they had faced the voice, when they had made their choice. The journal was gone. It's over, Sarah repeated, more to herself than to Emily. It's all behind us. Emily stared at the students around them, the ones who had been walking by without a care in the world. They hadn't noticed anything. There was no sign of the school being changed by what they had gone through, No lingering whispers or cold air. It was as if nothing had happened. But there was something gnawing at Emily, an unsettling sensation in the pit of her stomach. The world around her felt too perfect, too smooth, as though the cracks she had seen, the distortions in reality, had all been swept away. The memories of the basement, the door, the choices, they were beginning to fade, slipping through her mind like sand through her fingers. She didn't know whether that was a relief or the worst thing of all. "Hey," Thomas said, voice breaking through her thoughts. He pointed toward the far end of the hallway, his eyes wide. "Isn't that—" Emily turned to follow his gaze. At the other end of the hall, standing just outside the classroom door, was a figure she recognized instantly. A teacher. But it wasn't just any teacher. It was her teacher. The one who had been with them that morning. The one they had seen last before they'd descended into the nightmare of the basement. But there was something wrong. The figure was standing perfectly still, as though waiting for them, its face obscured by the shadows cast by the fluorescent lights overhead. Emily felt a coldness sweep through her again, a chill that wrapped around her spine, just like the one she'd felt when she had first stepped into that other reality. It was as if the teacher were watching them, waiting. "Why is she just standing there?" Emily asked, her voice trembling again. But before anyone could respond, the bell rang, a shrill, sudden sound that made Emily jump. Students immediately began to move, heading toward their classrooms, completely unfazed by the figure standing in the hallway. Sarah frowned, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the teacher. She wasn't there a minute ago. Emily's heart thudded painfully in her chest. Her fingers twitched, reaching for something, anything to anchor herself to reality. But she found nothing. There was no journal, no hint of the truth they had uncovered, no way to prove they hadn't just imagined everything. The figure began to move, slowly at first, its footsteps deliberate as it walked toward them. Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. "We need to go, now." The group turned to leave, but something stopped them. A voice, soft and cold, echoed in their minds, just like before. "You think you can escape?" The figure's voice, too calm, too unnerving, reached them as they walked away. "You can never escape." They all froze. Emily's stomach dropped. She turned back to the figure, her heart racing. The teacher stood there, smiling now, a twisted, haunting grin that stretched unnaturally across its face. And then, without warning, everything went dark. If you enjoyed this chilling journey into the unknown, don't forget to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an eerie story like this one. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know what you thought of the story. What was your favorite twist? How did the ending leave you feeling? Let's keep the conversation going.